I buy quite a lot of stuff from AliExpress, particularly when it comes to electronic components or test equipment or the sort of stuff that you might see me using in my other videos. There's a huge amount of stuff available on AliExpress. Some of it's pretty good and some of it is somewhat more questionable in terms of quality. I found videos like this useful myself in the past, so I figured why not share my experience of some of the items that I've purchased. There'll be links in the description to all of the items shown, along with the name of the product, so you should still be able to find it even if the link itself is no longer working. With that said, let's get the video going and bring out the first item. The first item I'll be looking at is this USB multifunction tester. I paid $6.10 for this, which equates to around £4.50. If you have a fee-free card, I'd always suggest buying in dollars from AliExpress, as you'll end up with a much better currency conversion rate, making it that little bit cheaper. The same is true if you choose to pay by PayPal. Make sure that the PayPal amount is in dollars so that the conversion is only done by your fee-free card. It's advertised as a voltage and current meter, giving real-time information about the charging state of the connected device. The packaging looks quite nice, with the tester coming in this plastic pouch. Taking it out of the pouch, my first impressions are quite good. It feels quite nice, it's got a metal housing, and it feels like a decent quality product. Of course, we won't know more until we actually test it, but so far so good. Also included in the pouch is a little instruction manual, which labels all of the information you'll find on the display. To start, I tested it out charging a Logitech MX Keys keyboard. I found it a little bit stiff to plug in, but I imagine as it's used, it will loosen slightly over time. Certainly, I don't have any worries about it falling out. On the left of the display, you'll find the information on the current voltage, amperage, and wattage that is passing through the device. On the right, you'll find values for milliamp hours and milliwatt hours to measure the total amount of power that has passed through the device since it started recording. In the top right, you'll see the amount of time that's passed since recording began. This can be particularly useful when trying to work out the storage capacity of a battery, as it tells you exactly how much power was used during charging. Switching now to something that draws a little more power, we can see another feature of this tester in action. By pressing the button on the rear of the tester, we can swap the total wattage and the CPU temperature on the display for an overview of the maximum wattage, amperage and voltage that the device has seen since it was last reset. Pressing and holding the button on the back of the device for 3 seconds will cause it to reset, which will wipe all of the values and start recording from scratch. To round off the review, I put it through its paces with the highest wattage USB Type-C device that I currently own. My laptop doesn't draw as much power as some more modern laptops do, but it was able to draw over 40 watts under load, and the Type-C tester had no trouble handling it. That's not too much of a surprise, as it's rated at between 4 and 30 volts and 0 to 12 amps, which equates to a maximum of 360 watts. I might have to try this again in the future when I've got something that will draw a little more power. So to conclude the review of the KWS-2301C USB Type-C power monitor, I have to say I've been really impressed with this device overall. The display is clear, bright and easy to read, despite the fact that some of the text can be quite small. I like that there are 2 modes available, which just makes it that little bit more useful. I also like the fact that it's got a metal housing, and it just looks and feels like a decent quality device, particularly given the low price. While I did praise the display for its readability, there are other similar devices available, albeit a bit more expensive, that do have a larger screen, and some of them also have colour displays, and if they're features that you're looking for, it might be worth spending a bit more and getting one of those. As a basic tester, it doesn't have support for showing USB power delivery protocols. Now, I wouldn't really expect something this price to have that sort of functionality, but I know that's something that some people might be looking for, so I did want to point out that the 2301C doesn't support that. All things considered, I'm more than happy with it, so I'd give the KWS-2301C a thumbs up. Next, I've got this ultra compact hot plate which is designed for reflowing PCBs. I thought this would be really useful for assembling some of the small PCBs that I make and save me a bit of hand soldering some of the small components. This costs just under $16, which is around £12. The surface of the hot plate is around 5.5 cm square, although this does include the screw mounts in the corners, which presumably are not going to be heated. The one I bought actually came with a slight issue out of the packet, and that is that there's actually a scratch in the top surface. It's not going to have a massive impact on the performance, but it does call the quality control into question. I mean, I'm not too bothered as long as it works, but it's not really a great start to receive it already damaged. Once you plug the hot plate in, it'll turn itself on automatically, with a small boot screen displaying the logo, which gradually fills in as it boots up. Once it's booted, you'll be greeted with a screen displaying the current temperature, along with a few other bits of information. To control the hot plate, there are two buttons on the rear, one either side of the USB port, which I did find a little bit awkward to use, particularly when the hot plate's turned on. It means you have to reach around the back of the hot plate to get to the controls. When on the home screen, pressing and holding one of the two buttons will either raise or lower the temperature. And to turn the hot plate on, you have to press both of the buttons at the same time. When looking at the two bars, the one on the right hand side, which is labelled P, shows the current heating state of the hot plate. The more the bar fills up, the more power that it's currently using. Looking at the bar on the left, the one that's labelled C, you'll notice a little circle in the middle of the bar, and this is the target temperature that you've currently set. The bar will gradually fill up as the temperature of the hot plate increases, and once the bar reaches the circle, it means the hot plate is now up to temperature. Given the small size of the display, I think they've done a decent job of fitting as much information on there as they possibly could. It's also possible to switch the display mode to show a temperature graph. I'll be honest, I haven't really found much use for this, but it is an option if that's something you'd rather see instead. To get an idea of the accuracy of the temperature of the hot plate, I used the temperature setting of my multimeter. And yes, I did stupidly use a plastic tool to hold the thermistor onto the hot plate. Not the smartest thing I've ever done. With a target set to 150 degrees, I only managed to get up to just over 140. This of course isn't a particularly scientific test, but it does suggest that the temperature on the surface of the hot plate is going to be a little bit below that is stated on the screen, which is something I'll keep in mind when I'm using it in the future. To put the hot plate through its paces, I decided to try soldering a USB Type-C port onto one of my PCBs. This is only a small PCB that fits well within the surface area of the hot plate, so this is exactly the kind of board that I plan to use it with. To give the hot plate a chance, I used some of my low temperature solder paste, which has a melting point of around 185 degrees, which is below the maximum temperature that the hot plate is capable of. As you can see here, it managed to reflow the solder joints, and I was actually really pleased with the results. I usually use this same solder paste, but hand solder these connectors in place, and this is certainly much easier than trying to do it by hand. So on to the summary, and here are my thoughts about this hot plate. As we saw earlier, with low temperature solder paste, this hot plate does get hot enough to melt the solder on a small PCB. But I think that's about it for the positives. This is really not a well-made device. It's incredibly lightweight, which for this sort of thing is definitely not a positive. It's light enough to be dragged around by the cable, which could prove to be a hazard when the plate's heated up. The quality control seems lacking, with mine having a damaged hot plate surface and a misaligned display. I also really don't understand why the buttons are placed around the back, because it means you have to reach over or around the hot plate when it's turned on to make any adjustments. While I could actually see me using this to assemble more of the boards we saw in this video, I can't recommend it because it's just not well made. You'd be better off with a small camping hot plate, which has a much bigger surface area and will at least get to higher temperatures. Next we have this Toocki 140 watt desktop USB charger. I'm usually a bit skeptical buying anything power related from AliExpress, but I've had a few really good quality USB cables in the past from this brand, and when the price dropped on it recently, I decided to give it a go. The charger was priced at just over $28, which works out to about £21, though I paid even less than this after using a coupon. It's a 5-port charger with 3 USB Type-C ports and 2 USB Type-A ports. The back of the box lists the power output capability of each of the ports. All ports can do 5, 9 and 12 volts at up to 3 amps. The Type-A ports can do 20 volts at up to 3 amps, while the Type-C ports do 15 volts at 3 amps and 20 volts at 5 amps. These only apply for using a single port, and there is more information in the listing about different combinations and the power outputs that are possible. When you open the box, you'll be greeted by the charger, its little stand and a small instruction manual. The stand has a nice feel to it and it has a rubberized base which should help it stay in position. Taking out the charger, you'll notice on the rear of it, it does go into a bit more detail about the power output combinations that it supports. It has a decent amount of weight to it and the housing feels like it's decent quality. Of course that doesn't tell you much about how it will perform, but it does give a good first impression. And last but not least, we've also got the 2-pin power cable. And of course mine has a UK plug on the end, but you can also buy versions that come with different plugs. When first powering the charger on, you'll notice that there's a little display above the top USB port. This does turn off after a while when there's no load on the charger, but otherwise there doesn't seem to be a way to switch this off. To really test the charger out, I've filled all of the ports with a variety of different devices. We've got my laptop which will be charging at 20 volts, my phone and iPad, a PS2 Slim which is connected through a little power adapter to provide it with 9 volts, and the camera which was charging through micro USB at 5 volts. Nothing was complaining about charging slowly, and the PS2 Slim, which had cut out entirely if it wasn't receiving the power it needed, kept going throughout the entire test, even when plugging in new devices. Charging did very briefly stop and restart for some devices when something new was plugged in, but for the PS2 to keep going it must be a very brief dropout. I had no problems plugging this many cables in, as there's decent spacing between each of the ports. After a few minutes drawing over 100 watts, it did start to get quite warm, but really it has to be expected when you're pulling 100 watts through such a small charger. I think realistically you're going to find that with any charger capable of this sort of output. So to sum up, I think this is a really nice little charger. It looks good and I do like the inclusion of the stand. The ports are well spaced and I didn't have any problems using them all at the same time. While I wasn't able to test that it can provide the full 140 watts claimed, I did manage to get over 100 watts out of it, and it managed to keep devices such as a PlayStation 2 powered even when plugging other devices in. The reason I know how much power it was outputting is because of that handy built-in display, which is a nice addition and certainly one that I found useful. The display is quite bright though, and it's a shame there isn't a way to turn it off when you're not actively trying to read the output. I can't vouch for this charger's longevity, but based on my experience with it so far, I'd give this one a thumbs up. The next item I have is a 10.1 inch Full HD portable monitor. And this particular model is made by a brand called ZSUS, ZSUS, I don't know, something like that. Luckily, the pronunciation of the brand name isn't important. You see a lot of listings for monitors like this on AliExpress, but I decided to go for this one because the price dropped to just £25, and at that price I thought it was worth giving it a go. So first impressions of the packaging, it seems pretty good. It comes in this rather generic looking box, which just describes it as portable monitor, new and slim. So we'll see about that when we get inside. So on the top of the box, so the first thing we get to is the instruction manual, and hopefully I shouldn't really need this. I mean, it's a monitor, so I'm expecting it to be pretty much plug and play. Next up, we've got the monitor itself, which comes in this little protective pouch. There are a couple of cables that are included. I think this one is the power cable, and it's powered through USB Type-C. And this one here looks like it's the HDMI cable. And the last thing in the box is a small stand. Removing the display from the pouch, it becomes apparent immediately just how glossy this display is. It's incredibly reflective, so just keep that in mind later on, because during testing you're going to be seeing a lot of reflections on this screen. On the right hand side of the display we've got a headphone jack and 2 buttons. And on the left hand side we've got 2 USB Type-C ports, one for power and one for display output, and a mini HDMI port also for display output. I'm going to open up the stand now just to give it a go and see how well it holds the display, though I will put it away again after so we can actually see the display on camera. It has a screw on either side, and we can literally just pull it open. You don't even really need to unscrew it. I guess that's just to make sure that it's tight enough to hold it in position. There's no VESA mounting holes or any other mounting points on the display, so your options are very limited out of the box. So if I just grab the monitor, just sit it in there, and yeah, I mean, it's a cheap stand. It does what it's designed to do. It's nothing particularly fancy, but it seems like it does the job. The included power cable is USB Type A to Type C, but I tested it using a Type C to Type C cable, plugged into a USB power supply, and it was able to power the display. Next, I plugged the screen into my laptop to get an idea of what it's capable of. For me, the display is more than bright enough, and the colours seem quite vivid as well. Though of course you do have settings to change the brightness and contrast, so you can tweak this to find the setting that you prefer. Also included is a setting labelled Ultra HDR mode. Now, I admittedly haven't tested it with an HDR capable device, but the fact that it's just a setting you turn on the monitor and all it seems to do is make everything brighter, I don't think it actually supports HDR. But I mean, the setting's there if you want a super bright display, and that's an option you can look into. A small quirk of this display is while it is full HD, it has a 3:2 aspect ratio rather than the more common 16:9. Making the resolution 1920 by 1280 rather than 1080. This does mean that some devices might stretch their display to fit, though if your device supports the resolution you shouldn't have any issues. Testing the display with a few Wii U consoles I have lying around made it possible to compare the display directly to the Wii U's gamepad, and while doing this it became quite obvious that there's a definite yellow tint to this monitor. The monitor does come with built-in speakers, though as you'd probably expect for something this small and thin, they're not particularly good. I mean, they do the job if you don't have any alternative, but I wouldn't choose to rely on them if I had another option. Can't say I'm a huge fan of the monitor's controls, especially this funny little flicky switch here, which I never quite seem to be able to use properly. I'd have much preferred just a couple of standard buttons on the side, instead of one that does different things depending on how you move it. For me, I just haven't found it particularly intuitive, and it's made it more difficult than it needs to be to navigate through the on-screen menus. I did also try to get an output through USB Type-C, as it does accept a Type-C display input, but unfortunately none of my devices were happy to output to this monitor. I also decided to do a quick test of the power consumption. and using the default out of the box settings, the display's drawing just over 2 watts, and this increases to about 3 watts when turning on HDR mode. With power consumption this low, you might even be able to power it from a USB port on your device. So all in all, this is a compact, lightweight display with decent screen quality. It supports USB power delivery, but has low enough power consumption that you could power it through a USB Type A port, if you've got the right cable. On the downside, I did find the controls quite fiddly to use, though maybe over time I'll get a bit more used to that. It does use a mini HDMI port rather than a full-size port, and I personally would have taken the extra thickness to have had a full-size port. The speakers are awful, although admittedly I didn't really expect much given how small and thin the display is. The speakers are awful, but I think that's kind of a given on something this sort of size. But if sound quality is important to you, be prepared to use some external speakers. But for me, by far the biggest drawback of this display is just how reflective it is. It made it incredibly difficult trying to film it for this video, and I was hoping to make use of it in future videos as well, which is going to be difficult given how reflective it is. Overall, I am going to give this one a thumbs up because I can see myself getting a lot of use out of this. It just remains to be seen whether I can use it in future videos. The screen quality is good, it's very portable, low power consumption, it's everything I'd want in a portable display. So that's it for this video, and we've ended up with 3 out of the 4 items being given a thumbs up. If you've got any of these items, I'd be interested to hear your opinions and whether you agree with my conclusion. We haven't looked at anything too wacky in this video, but I'll hopefully be doing some more of these videos in the future, where we'll be looking at some of the more interesting things I've bought from AliExpress over the past few months. So be sure to keep a lookout for more of these AliExpress videos in the future.